how do we know if we're accessible? So we often get asked some version of this. Is there a score? Is there a threshold? Is there some other criteria? Everyone wants to know, show me the tick box that says I am 100% accessible or I am not. And again, this is often a misunderstanding, I think. It's easy to see where this comes from because the requirements in the law are pretty much, you must be accessible, but then no one actually quite gets into the finer points of, yes, but what does that mean really? The truth is, accessibility is more of a scale, like a continuum, rather than a switch. It's definitely not something that is on or off. We would say there's something like at one end, you've got something that is totally inaccessible. And on the other end, you've got something that is a brilliant experience for all users. Obviously, you want to be as far to the right as possible. And this is what we're grading you on. But there are certain levels of accessibility failing that would almost certainly leave you open to, well, certainly if you're in America, you'd be open to lawsuits, but would be unambiguously interpreted as totally inaccessible. Simple example would be something like what you saw earlier with those images, where you had a series of images and you were asked to click on an image, but there was no alt text. You literally couldn't know what you were clicking on. So you'd be asked to click on image, image, or image if you were, say, blind. That would be sort of a classic unambiguous example. There are many cases, however, where it's more subjective. So let me give you an example. There is a requirement in WCAG that content is easy to understand. And I forget the UK equivalent, but I think it's like approximately a reading age, somewhere around 12 years, 13 years of age, which is actually surprisingly high. But basically, your text should be easily understood by as many people as possible. Now, here are two examples of the same content, and it's quite clear to a human being that what you see on the right is easier to understand than what is on the left. And indeed, a computer can determine this as well. We have all sorts of math and formula that's designed to assess this. But at the same time, how would you actually grade that? Would you grade one as a pass and one as a failure? Or, I mean, like, technically, the material on the left is, depending on your interpretation, accessible in that you can at least hear it or read it. It's just a bad experience. A pretty strong case in this example could be made that this is failing a AAA requirement, especially. But it isn't as simple as yes or no. And what if we took the example on the right, which is, say, pretty good, and we just added one sentence that failed that criteria? Would that make the entire page a failure? Would it make the entire website a failure? Probably not. So the truth is that accessibility, as I said, tends to be graded on a continuum. And again, this comes back to the whole manual and automated testing. You want to be thinking of the automated testing as giving you broad coverage and the manual testing as giving you the in-depth human experience. And as long as you're actually doing this, you're engaging with this process, you're understanding the problems and you're fixing them, you are basically about as accessible as anyone is actually ever going to get. Even the people who wrote the standards don't meet the fullest level of that standard, as in AAA, across the board, unambiguously accessible. It's something to strive for, but generally you just want to be aiming to max out your single and your AA compliance as we measure it on a percentage, and you want to be getting a high score for that. And I appreciate that is probably the kind of woolly answer that you don't want to hear, but unfortunately, the law and indeed the standards themselves don't explicitly state here is a pass and here is a fail, and it's probably because they can't. I can say I'm working with people on WCAG 3 and the new standard, or it's got all sorts of code names and they're messing around with whether they'll call it WCAG 3, but the latest and next version of the standard that is probably many years away, they are aware of this problem and they are looking at ways of making it unambiguous. So they are considering having a straight pass fail, or perhaps more likely a sort of like an ABC kind of level grade that could actually be measured and certified. But at the moment, there really isn't such a thing. Another thing I recommend, by the way, is if you're looking at manual testing, but you haven't got the time/money to throw a wide range of people with disabilities at your website, An alternative, we provide this free toolbar. You can check it out, silktide.com/toolbar, and it lets you simulate a wide range of disabilities. Also, because you all have SOCTIM reports, if you've ever looked at the inspector, which is basically when you look at a single page in your report, we actually provide a button, I don't know if you can see this here, where it says simulate dyslexia. Depending on the issue we are raising, we will usually offer to simulate a given disability that is relevant to that issue. So for example, here we're looking at a website where it's talking about text being hard to read. And if I was to choose to simulate that dyslexia, you can actually see here what the sentences might look like, and then you could interpret whether or not subjectively, if that actually looks like it would be super hard to understand, or if it's not really that much of a problem. So there are ways that you can kind of blend automated and manual together, and we're working on that continuously. But for the most part, you want to, look at a mixture.